Therese Schroeck. She owns Crystal Environmental and has specialized in solid liquid separation since 1992. Her expertise is in municipal, industrial, and liquid transportable waste. Please, for the 5 of you that are here, please welcome Therese.
I need 5. Where's everybody else at?
We'll bring the rest of them.
Okay, so about 6 months ago, I talked to MSTA about doing a presentation here again. Sometimes I get to talk and sometimes I just get to talk, but sometimes I get it on the stage. And what I enveloped in my brain was, what have we been doing with the liquid waste that we're picking it up? Where has it gone for the last 30 years? So that's where the title was inspired, Processing Liquid Waste, the Michigan History for 3 Decades. And then I had to ask the second question. How many people have been in this room for 30 years? Can you stand up? I want to see who's been here for 30 years or more. 1, 2. Then I thought, well, now I'm no longer processing liquid waste. Now I've become a historian because I'm going to give you a little bit of history about where we came from and where things are going. And it could challenge and inspire you, but I talk about a lot of shat. Do you know what shat is? Okay, so there's this word about taking manure from Europe, and manure from Europe goes from Europe to the United States so that we could fertilize our crops. Back in the 1700s, guess what happened? If you put the manure in the bottom of the ballast of the boat and it got wet, it would blow up. So everything about the fertilizer that was coming on the boats back then, sail ships, was, packing slips said, ship high in transit. That would be ship S, high, H-I-N-T, transit. So we formulated another word that we can use with this now because I'm a lady in this industry playing with this stuff since 30-some years ago. So I've called it shat. So every time I go to say poop or something else, I just say shat. So if I do say shat, you'll know what we're talking about. Okay. How many land appliers are in the room? Land appliers. Yeah. We're going to go through exactly how this thing worked. Back in 2006, I suppose, we started talking about land applying liquid waste, and it was always free. But then we had to put tanks in and this, that, and other things in, and we've enhanced the work that we've been doing with it. So I'm going to give you a little review about A, land application, B, hauling liquid waste to a approved facility, and C, about the people who have built processing facilities in the state of Michigan. You guys like pictures? Land application is septic. It's very easy to do in Michigan. All you need to do is get a land application permit and follow the rules. Most of the land appliers that I know are doing 500,000, 1 million gallons a year. I've seen as much as 6, 7, and 8 million gallons a year being land applied, which you need a lot of acreage to land apply to get rid of the material. You have to be a good neighbor because you know what they're going to do is they're going to put a subdivision in next door, so you have to make sure that your shat doesn't stink. And then you can't land apply when it's really wet out there. You shouldn't land apply in Lake Erie or Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, or just a wet field. You have to make sure you can only land apply when it's dry enough. There was a picture that Matt Campbell had here about 10 years ago. A land applier got stuck in that back corner of the field, and it was buried up to the axles on about 110 horsepower tractor. And we finally made him get rid of that because that was past time. The other thing that they did in 2006 when they passed the legislation, if you were going to land apply, you had to have storage for 90 days, which made a lot of sense. Because the next thing they're going to tell you is when it comes in, you have to screen the material out somehow. This is just a really simple bar screen to give you a visual. And the EPA has always said you can't land apply fertilizer on the ground when it's frozen. Makes some sense. So they enacted that you can't land apply on frozen ground. You have another rule. And then if you do land apply, you probably wouldn't put it on a soybean crop. You probably wouldn't put it on a corn crop. You would wait till that got harvested out. So now you have to worry about if you land apply, and I guess you can land apply on a hay crop, rye hay, timothy hay, alfalfa, but the ruling underneath the section 403 for land application permittability is 30 days after you apply septic on the land, you're supposed to wait, and then you can harvest the crop. There was one year here about 15 years ago, specifically in Ohio, I recall. The guy land applied in May before they planted the seed, and then they didn't harvest it until July. The problem was it never rained. We had like 1.5 inches of rain through the month of June and July. The 30-day idea was, well, God's going to rain on the soil, and then the crop's not going to have stuff in it. Well, that hay that they harvested that year ended up going to an equine college, and come November, when they started into the current year's crop of hay, they lost 10 horses, 20 horses. They died of something called rhinovirus, which is very similar to the contagion that comes from the herpes virus. They lost 12 horses at the college. The neat thing that Michigan has that nobody else has for land application in the United States of America is you could do 3 parts of septic and 1 part of grease. And for the most part, is anybody just a grease hauler in the room? Grease haulers only. You do some, right? But in Michigan, there's grease haulers and then there's septic haulers. For the most part, you guys don't interconvene, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. If you have the materials and you paid for all the equipment, land applying is free. But that tractor wasn't, by the way, and neither are the hoses and everything else to land apply. Did I lose that? If I face this too far this way, it doesn't work. So now it became a time for change. Land application was free, but when you had to put the tank in, the screening devices, and buy the tractors and all the installations, and most guys would tell me in our roundtables here for the last 20-some years that land application's free. I use the farmer's place up the road. Well, how much does the lease cost? It doesn't cost anything. Are you paying the taxes? No. The guy just lets me use it to fertilize his crops. And that works for a very long time, and it has. The regulators are our friends. So somewhere in the transition, this even goes back to the 1990s, it costs 2 cents, 3 cents, 4 cents a gallon to get rid of septic. In the current marketplace, it's 5 cents, 10 cents, 15 cents, 21 cents a gallon in some locations, and you must take it to them for 21 cents a gallon. So if you got 1,000 gallon, that's just going to cost you $210 to take that pump out over there. So you have to pass that on to the customer. Then people got smart because they were taking this liquid waste to 1,000 gallons at a time, 2,000 gallons at a time. They started consolidating their trucks. They had a full truck to take in. Some facilities charge you by truck, 3,500 gallon truck. I got 3 things in there, so they charge you 3,000 gallons. And the other thing we find is they're putting flow meters on, so you actually pay for the gallons to go through the pipeline when you discharge. If anybody ever took liquid waste to a municipality, what you got here? Anybody do that? Did they ever say you're shut off for a couple days because they having other problems? Because this is a little letter that came from the sewer plant. We cannot take your septic. We are having our own problems in our plant. Sign the sewer plant guy. And then you have to wait till they get current with what they can do. Private processes in Michigan account for 35 to 50,000 gallons. And I got really close in confirming this. But in Michigan, if you look at the people who are qualified to take liquid waste into the sewer plant, and by that I'm going to say some of them take septic only, some of them take septic and grease, some of them take septic, grease, and porta-john waste. Very few of them take car wash waste. There's 2 operating permits out of 15 on the website right now. One is just RV waste, and the other guy's permitted for 192 gallons a day of porta-john. I figured there's 20 to 30 gallons in a porta-john, so that's only 8 porta-johns that he's discharging a year. But he actually wrote up an operating plan so he could process his own porta-john waste at his location. So there's some very unique things. The RV waste and the porta-john waste really surprised me, especially with the volumes of it. But now we're going to go talk about what happened here. Back in the 90s, there were a handful of facilities that were processing their own liquid waste. And when I came into this room about the turn of the century, there were still like a half a dozen. Today, there's somewhere between, and we're still getting the jury out on this, somewhere between 10 and 15 facilities that are private operating facilities. A lot of them just take care of their own waste. They won't take anybody else's in. But a lot of the facilities I'm working on now are doing 5 to 10 million gallons a day, and they have the elbow room to receive all that material. So we're going to deliver waste to a place, or are we going to process the waste? That's the Pony Express question. So the advantage to building a system is to get off the land, increase your profits, because if it costs you 10 cents a gallon to get rid of it, and you build capital and you spend 3 cents a gallon to process it, you can make 5, 6, 7 cents a gallon even if your math isn't really good. Uh-oh, missed one. There's a back button here, I think. Increase profits, and then your facility is open 24/7. You don't have to worry about leaving a truck out in the cold while you're waiting for it. That's another question I have. Does anybody have a battery-operated pumper truck in Michigan? No? Not a one. If you are, holler out. I want to hear it. There's a couple dozen of them in California, but if it's warm out, I think that works, but it's kind of a scary scenario we're embarking upon. Solve a regional problem, you can take care of your own liquid waste like a couple of these guys only do, or you can bring in other liquid waste when you figure out what the process does. So the biggest clue I have to tell everybody, if you didn't know this, if I bring in 100,000 gallons of waste of your septic, and I just fill a 100,000 gallon tank, 95,000 gallons of it is liquid waste that would go to the city sewer. Only 5% of that weighted volume potentially is septic waste or grease trap. If it's grease trap, you have another option. You can take it to solids and set them aside, and then you can make 2 to 3% can become diesel fuel, a biofuel that you can manufacture. There's probably about a dozen facilities in the country that do that. There's not very many because it only works when diesel fuel is $4 to $5 a gallon. That's where it competes. Take the leap of faith. How many people know my dogs? Anybody know my dogs? Remember my dogs? Oh, come on. That's Dalton. That's the 4th dog I raised for leader dogs for the blind. Every plan looks the same for all of these dozen facilities that are being built, private processing facilities in the United States. You receive the stuff in, cam locks, off the truck, pump it out, put it through some place to collect the grit, put it through another place to collect the, what do you call them, balloons and whistles? Anything bigger than 3/8 of an inch. And then you take that material and you run it into an equalization tank, mix it up. And at the end, you put it through dewatering. So then again, 95% of the waste goes right down the pipeline, or we're working on a couple where we can actually have our own discharge liquid permits to go with here in Michigan. And then you have to do a little odor control. That's the final thing, that little yellow stuff. But I'm going to talk about this a little bit. Hey, who has anybody have an Alexa? Alexa? Who has Alexa in their house? Okay, Alexa, what time is it? Do you know what time it is? I'm checking my speed. You don't know? Oh, I'm only 15 minutes in. I can talk for quite some time still. Good. I'll check on the Alexa time again one more time. Okay, so when you bring in grease trap, or you bring in septic waste, and you run them through a processing facility, there's a good rule of thumb. for every million gallons you process, 1,500 pounds can be just the grit. Where does the grit come from in a septic and a grease trap pit? Where does it come from? It's kind of the concrete starts to wear away a little bit. It's not the lady doing laundry. It's usually not the fact that her husband was very dirty. The stuff comes from we're breaking down the components of the septic plants. And y'all seen some old septic tanks where they're no longer square. They're kind of curved around because the thing starts to wear out. So there is a lot of grit in this material. So we do a double baffle where you can pump all your stuff off the truck into this tank and then overflow it into the second tank and then accumulate all the grit just on 24 foot of space by 8 foot of space 2 times, and then your grit's not inside your process. We like to get that out because grit is very abrasive and it can break the other equipment down as you continue to process. That's another way to get out the screenings. That's right, the balloons and whistles, right? Or whatever else is in there. You get straws and you get applesauce dishes and grease trap. You get those big steak knives. You'll find those in the screenings. If you want to build a kitchen, you probably could out of that stuff. Mechanical grit removal, that guy offloads into that big dumpster. The dumpster overflows into the balloons and whistle remover thing. And then you end up with sludgy water at the end. And then sometimes we grind them. There's a couple facilities where we just grind them. That way the waste is not another garbage bag of waste over there from the scooping up with that fork and stuff that you do. You end up with that broken down into small particles, something under 3/8 of an inch. And that's the rule for land application here too. You can't put anything over 3/8 of an inch on the farmer's fields when you land apply. Day tanks, I have a guy right now, he's driving me crazy, but they do this. If you're gonna run 25,000 gallons a week or a day, have a 25,000 gallon tank. And then you can equalize that tank and add chemistry to it. Now I've got 25 things to find some common denominator of chemistry, and the efficiency coming out works much better. These are really cool. You can see these later, but basically when you go into that place, it's just a flat concrete slab now, but those are 2 underground storage tanks, 25,000 gallons side by side. That's up by Grand Rapids, Michigan. Slurry stores, that was a big thing up here. There was a fellow that used to sell the slurry stores for the land application stuff. He was in here every year, everybody was buying slurry stores. It's a nice thing to have, but it becomes temperature sensitive. Oh, there you go. I was thinking that, and all of a sudden the next slide worked out for me. Separation is optimized by an ambient temperature. Polymer chemistry lime, time and temperature for land application, says 70 to 75 degrees. That's a pretty standard. You're kind of in play. But I remember being in Iowa. This goes back about 10 or 15 years. And when the mountains started melting off and we started going into springtime, the temperature of the water was 35 degrees coming from the water plant. Well, that doesn't make down pudding real well, nor does it take care of polymer, polymer and the chemistries we do. So keeping this stuff indoors and keeping it safe in an area so that you can control temperature is brutally important. That's a chemistry lab for polymer. It's fun. In some places we put pH meters in, and we have motivates a pump to take it to a pH of 6, 7, 8, 9, keep the pH regulated, and it does it automatically. Most of my clients just go and put a little bit of lime slurry into their equalization tank. They take the material, they put a probe in it, and then they know what the pH is after about 10 or 15 minutes. If it's still too low, they add more lime. It's all about recipes. It's kind of like making cookies or cake. There's A, B, and C, and D that have to go into every one of them, and then what are you going to do to flavor it? Become a regional solution. And again, we've got several facilities right now pushing that 2, 5, 10 million gallons a year mark here in the state of Michigan. And at 10 cents a gallon, that's where the money comes in and kind of starts to work. Sludge pumps, you guys are used to like air pumps and vacuum pumps and things like that. But when we're optimizing dewatering, you need something that's more like a positive displacement pump. Something with a rotor and gear, something with a rotor and stator, something that when the material comes to it, if you got head pressure, you're still going to get 100 gallons a minute when you put your set point in, and you get the same chemistry going out. That gives you better optimum results. That's another way to do polymer. The problem with this one, though, is they use 500 gallons of polymer, 10 gallons a minute. That's only 50 minutes worth of polymer. The on-demand systems, when you have something coming out of a drum directly, that has a tendency to give you a better optimum result. Anybody ever see how polymer pops and how it works? You take dirty water that comes off your truck. I thought there was a thing here. It doesn't work. You're right, that thing doesn't work. The little red dot's not up there. And the water clarifies itself on the bottom just through mixing. And then if you have it in a gravity box or something, all that clear water goes away real quick. And then the rest of it, by pressure, irrigates itself just like water goes into the ground. That's another one where they put polymer in so the material goes up. And that's one where they put the polymer in and the material goes down. It still gives you free water, but that water is going to irrigate through the pressurized stuff. I got a couple more pictures, but the reality is when we talk about 95% of the liquid that you're processing becomes clear water, it looks like the guy on my side. Uh-oh, did it again. That's what the stuff looks like coming out of the truck, and that's how dramatic the difference can be for that stuff. These are just sludge conditionings, ways to mix that polymer into the sludge so it comes out really, really well. This is one of my first jobs. This goes back to like 1999. We built this plant in Fostoria, Ohio. And that guy made that thing because he realized that if he had 100 gallons a minute going through this 3-inch pipe, the velocity had that mixing agitation to it. So I go in there, and he had gone to the hardware store, and he made up his own little mixing device. The ingenuity of pumpers, guys. We call it bubblegum, duct tape, and baling twine, but usually you guys are really smart about most of the stuff we do. Polymer's real gooey. You know what polymer's like? The stuff you put on your dentures to keep them stuck in your mouth. You can spit on it all day and it doesn't go away. So the only way to get rid of it is to disperse it if you get too much. There's a couple gooey polymer pictures here. That's the stuff coming out of a 55-gallon drum. That was a 7,000-gallon tank that broke loose in about 12 polymer systems out in Long Island years ago. When you dewater, you put the chemistry in right, you get nice even windrows, and the stuff will come out really nice. Dewatering containers have been a very, very good solution to get an entry point into this industry so that these fellows can build these plants and do 1 million or 2 million or 3 million gallons a year. That's what a dewatering box looks like. That's a 30-yard dewatering box. It's got 4,000 gallons in it, if memory serves me correctly, of liquid. But we processed 25,000 gallons through that filter media. And at the end of the day, you've got 15, 12 yards of solids inside of the container, which can be A, taken to a landfill, or B, can go to fertilizer. You can make Class A or Class B biosolids out of it as well. I have this one client, this is outside of Michigan. I hate to jump out of Michigan all the time, but I do too much of this. He does 150,000 gallons a day of septic and 250,000 gallons a day of grease trap. That's a lot of flow. I mean, the number's huge. And again, if 10% of that volume is solid waste at $50 a ton to a landfill, oh, no, he doesn't do that. He makes fertilizer out of it. And instead of charging $10, $20, $25 a ton, he charges the fertilizer value in the packet $30, $40 a ton to get rid of all that volume of waste. Just to challenge and inspire. Solids, when you do solids liquid separation, you open the back door of your dumpster or your dewatering can. It should be standing pretty steady up inside there so that it's And it's between a horse poopy and a cow poopy. Let's just say that would work. Or we could say shat. And then when it comes out, then you have a solid waste. That primarily was actually grease trap too. That was all grease trap. And it was kind of strange that the grease trap was so dirty. It was so dark. We have a lot of bell filter presses in this industry. There's probably 3 or 4 of them that I can think off the top of my head. Process accepted and or grease trap. And then when you do it wrong, I hate to say this very loud and very much, but there's a couple rules of the patterns of the components that I teach that you need to do A, B, C, D, E. And somebody says, well, I don't want to do that. Well, if you don't do that, you might end up with a problem, like the plant doesn't work. And I've seen too many people put $50, $100, $300,000 into an environmental side to build these facilities, and they never learned how to run it. They never incorporated it. So the incorporation of this is not about buying one device down at the pumper show, wet show. It's not about buying one device, it's about buying the whole entire process that you can succeed with. Alexa, what time is it? 42. I'm only a half an hour in. Okay, I got a couple more. All right. If it's slick, if you have too much polymer in, the material gets really slicky and slimy. It's kind of the difference between having brown sugar and mayonnaise. It's going to kind of go down, maybe like a cow patty after 2 or 3 weeks of eating clover in May in Michigan. And then when you don't do it correctly, you get dirty stuff. Did I tell you I was going to have a lot of shat pictures? A couple of you already knew that, right? That's one with too much polymer in it, and there's so much polymer that it's sliding back down as you run the machine through. It slides back down. This is a distribution problem that happens a lot when you don't have good equalization of materials. And again, these are those, we're really focusing at this point in time on those 10 or 15 facilities here in Michigan that are doing private processing. And in the 20-some years I've been around here, some of them have come and some of them have gone. I have some equipment right now we're starting up in Indiana from a plant closure here in Michigan. And they called me up and said, I got used equipment, what are we going to do with it? I was like, oh, you're going to build a processing plant, I hope, and get a permit and do it right, so we take it back to square one. But when it doesn't work out, you see how the material should come out like really nice, and that's how you get the 30, 40, 50% solids coming out of the back of the machine. That's the inside of a dewatering can. That right there is 25,000 gallons of septic left over in a 30-yard container. That's crazy. And it's only, like I said, probably 12 yards left over. That's another angle on it. The water coming out, relatively speaking, just like those 2 vials I have, it looks clear when we get finished with it. Then there's odor control, because some people seem to think that poop stinks. I don't know why. You know, for us, what does it smell like? That's right, I'm glad you said it. Money, right? It smells like money. We're okay with that. But if you get odor control, you just positively displace the air, just like your furnace would displace within that whole entire room. And then you run it through a biofilter so that the neighbors don't complain. My favorite one is up there in Lowell. She is due winds are west to east, and she's got a mobile home park right next door. Those people were home a lot more than most. And then right next to it, she has a nursing home. So when we built that plant, we had to have a lot of thought about how we were going to take care of the odor control. This is a homemade scrubber that this fellow made. He got the filtration media from a scrubber company, and he did it on a corrugated pipe, and he had sodium hypochlorite on the top, and it's another way to do odor control. Why do efficiencies occur? Yeah, we already told you about all that. You know, when you build a plant, make sure you look at all these elements and that. And if you don't know, call the manufacturers of your equipment and figure that out. And then, you know, then they call me also, I suppose. If you have optimum separation, you can get rid of that 95% of the water in a processing plant every day. You got 95% of your problem solved. Then the rest of the question is, what do you do with the solid waste to the side? And again, you can do landfill to it, or you can get another permit for composting. That's a Class A biosolid. We were doing 150 gallons a minute coming off of this bell filter press. And they put an auger and a pig mill in it. You ever see how concrete cement mixers work? So they dusted in lime, just like we do for a land application permit, put it on the solids, ran it through a screw auger conveyor. He was at 98% of all of his solid waste going out was marketable, sellable, beneficial reuse. He was getting $10, $15, $20 a gallon, a ton for this stuff. Instead of paying $50 a ton on the other side, so it's a net $70 profit. Used tanks. If you guys know where there's any used tanks, 10 or 20,000 gallon tanks, I'm always looking for those because a lot of our pumpers, we start out with some used materials. A little bit of suffrage of doing that, but I'd rather buy a car with 20,000 miles on it than pay for the price on the front side, so I understand that. You need good mixing. We favor boat motor kind of impellers because that gives you a very, very strong mix. Gives you a great mix. There's 3 different manufacturers of that material in the country. There's another one. This is funny. These fellows of mine, friends from Philadelphia, bought this plant down in North Carolina. And instead of having the water go from the dewatering equipment, it went into 2,000 gallon tank, 2,000 gallon tank, 2,000 gallon tank. Why? Because they were pumpers. They could relate to a 2,000 gallon tank. But every day, they'd have to go in there, and they got this stuff that was like moss growing on top of the clear water going to the city sewer. So the volume of the total solid is way too high. So that fellow would go into these manholes with a super vac. It's like, what do you call it, a wet vac, one of those wet dry vacs. And he would skim it off like a swimming pool. And there was a bunch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think there was 8 different 2,000 gallon tankers, and he would have to clean it off. He's like the pool boy for the clear water going out. It should have just been left and sent away. These site tours, that's not equalization and mixing. Not for the size and scope that these guys were operating. It was too small, and then every time you change the tank to the next one, your chemistry bumps. And there's no mixing in those tanks, so the bottom of it's thicker, you know what that looks like. The top of it is grease, and you've got 3 different chemistries because you have a free water in the middle. So to equalize, whether you're doing a transportation from here to there or whatever, equalization is crucial. Holy tanks, others. A lot of other things. I put this in there only because sometimes we do dissolved air flotation if we have a lot of grease. Sometimes we add in anaerobic digestion. I've had a guy buy a cogenerator. The guy does 150,000 gallons a day, bought a cogen facility, and he makes electricity and sells it to the grid. Again, these are the kind of tanks that most of us are seeing in this industry. Round tanks. I need a couple of those ones, like 12,000 gallons, I think, is what he's looking for. And then we got dewatering, the dewatering presses. If you got goo on your belts, the water is going to the city sewer, and you're going to have premiums for your discharges, and that gets expensive. But again, most of these guys are doing 1 million, 5 million, 10 million gallons and more per year each. And the clearer the water, the less the fees are when you're sending out a discharge to a city sewer. This machine has no brains, use your own. That's when you see chemistry flipping that and people start asking questions and we solve it. This little machine's a really cool booger. I've done this a couple of times, but my favorite story about this machine, it's a 1 meter bell filter press. And it's got something like the tray size of those 2 tables side by side. And they run the speed really quick. And they put the septic on it, separate it. And this facility, they did 70% septic and 30% grease trap. pH adjusted the equalization tanks, ran it across and came out. I've never seen this before, and I don't know if I'll see it again unless somebody else steps into that plate. He gets 50% cake solids. The dewatering cans get 20%, 30% cake solids. That's that 5% differential I told you about, with 5% of the weight of the liquid coming in. It's going to be the money that we're going to have to spend to get rid of it. But this fellow, man, I've never seen it go so dry. It was totally nuts. And I couldn't believe I was watching the flow meter, 160, 200 gallons a minute, 250 gallons a minute. You know what 200 gallon a minute is? 288,000 gallons a day. And he had 2 machines to do that. He was designed flow for about 600, I don't know, the decibels get really big. 2 waste streams. You get 2 7,000 gallon tanks. It's a good idea. It's a bigger tank than what most of us have when we start from the pumper industry. But it ends up being too small because this guy was running, let me think, 160 to 200 gallons a minute. And every like 50 minutes, he would run out of sludge because he had to go to another tank. So he's over-designed on one side of his plant, under-designed it another side. That's the flow plan. The flow plan is really kind of simple. That's how it works. I think I told you, I just detailed all these things in fun, but you got your your grit removal and screening. You've got your equalization to a tank. You've got your chemistry addition. You have your dewatering, and the water can go to the city sewer. Or again, we're looking at groundwater discharge permits this year in Michigan. So I keep it real simple. When I start a conversation with anybody who's intrigued about maybe looking forward to do this, what I say is, how many gallons did you do last year? And what did it cost? So if it's a nickel a gallon and you did 1 million gallons, you're spending $50,000. But if you're doing 5 million gallons and a nickel a gallon, you're spending $250,000. The rate of return of the cash cow when you build this facility with your own liquid waste and the other stuff starts to make financial sense. And I had this guy, Mick Torek, teach me this back about 25 years ago. He says, Therese, I don't care how much it costs for the equipment. He goes, I want you to figure out for me what it costs per gallon if I do 3 million gallons a year. And so we did, and that's how I really started ramping up in this room, because I wouldn't let people build a facility if it was kind of too small. You had to be able to fill it up if you're going to spend money, so you had to have a rate of return on it. This is a Mick Torek. He wanted to build it. He made me do this thing. See, I didn't even get that far yet, and that was the next guy I was going to talk about. There's my dog again. This is how I plan it. Figure out what you got. You have septic or grease or whatever. You have commercial waste. You have something like applesauce waste. Is there something else around the neighborhood? Remember, Traverse City started taking in cherry waste from the manufacturing of cherries up there. And they were charging like 15 cents, 20 cents a gallon. That was about 10 years ago. So there's a lot of commercial options when you write your permittability to get this stuff through. So that's about it. I'm here till, I don't know, Wednesday morning. And if you guys have any questions, now's your turn. Tag, you're it. Really?
Great job.
Was it entertaining? Was it a lot about shot pictures? That's what I try to do. Okay, thank you very much. You're up.